Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 5th session of the Career Tips Thursday. My name is Valentina Cocco, and I'm a Human Resources Officer working in UNOG, the United Nations office at Geneva, and I will be your facilitator today. Let me share my screen. We will go over the agenda for today. So today's session will deal with how to prepare for competency-based interviews, but specifically we will focus on how to answer CBI questions. Now, what we're going to do today is for you to understand the basic CBI principle, to understand the competencies in the framework of the United Nations and all the indicators, and for you to be able to prepare concrete and pertinent answers to the questions that are asked. Why is this so important? I don't have to mention the fact that competency-based interviews are mandatory steps in all recruitments, and therefore it is paramount for you to be able to prepare according to the competencies that are advertised in your job opening. And this will allow you not only to market yourself better, but also to pass the recruitment phases that you are applying for. So today's agenda, as you can see, we will have around 20 minutes of PowerPoint presentation where we will go through the basic principles of CBI on the competencies, and we have picked one specifically, and on how to prepare the CBI answers. Then we will have also about a 10 minutes practice exercise that we prepared for you, and Alison has shared in the chat the workbook that we have prepared for these sessions with a little summary of what we will be discussing in this presentation, but also with one practical exercise that you will be able to focus on at the end of the presentation. Don't worry about questions. Questions will be posted in the chat. I will try to respond to the chat when you will be doing the practice exercise, but any questions that you also want to ask and that may not be addressed or fully addressed in the chat, and that is of public interest, will be asked during the Q&A session at the end. Now, if without much further ado, we can start the presentation. So CBI basic principles. As you know, there are 3 core values in the United Nations, 8 core competencies, and 6 managerial competencies. So core values, of course, are integrity, professionalism, and respect for diversity. The core competencies that are usually advertised in non-managerial positions, usually you find from 3 to 5 core competencies, are communication, teamwork, planning and organizing, accountability, client orientation, creativity, technological awareness, and commitment to continuous learning. When you have a managerial position, normally at the P5, D1 level, sometimes you also may have managerial positions at the P4 level or at the higher grades of GS, notably G6 and G7. You may find 3 core competencies and 1 or 2 managerial competencies. And the managerial competencies: leadership, empowering others, building trust, managing performance, and judgment and decision making. Now, so these are the competencies that form the framework, the competency framework of the United Nations. Now, it is very important when we talk about competencies that we distinguish between what is the competence, so CE, and what is the competency. Now, the interview, it's called the CBI because it focuses on the competency, but the competency is based on the competence. So the competence, in other words, is your skill to do something, is a technical skill that you have acquired with knowledge, with studying, with training, with on-the-job learning. And normally the competence responds to the question of what? What can you do? I can draft well in English. That's a competency. That's a skill that you have. And when you apply this skill to a particular job, that becomes a skill in action and it becomes a competency. So the competency will be the combination of the skill, but then it will also be mixed with the behaviors that you will carry out in applying this competency to your applying this competence, this skill to your job. So the competency is really a combination of attributes, skills, abilities, and behaviors that are directly related to the successful performance in a particular job. And therefore, the competency responds to the question of how. How are you doing this? What can you do is your skill, but how are you applying your skill to your job is your competency. Okay, it's very important we distinguish that because the competency is more complex than a simple skill. Now, when we talk about performance, okay, these are slides that you may have seen also in the CBI training if you have taken it recently, the face-to-face one, I mean. Now it's blended and it's online in the UN Staff College website in the blue line. But before, when we used to train face-to-face staff members on a 2-day training on competency-based interviewing, we had this slide, and we had this slide to explain to staff members what performance is meant in the United Nations. The performance is a mix of all these four fields. It's a mix of ability to do something and knowledge. And those two are tested during the technical assessment. Technical assessment could be a technical interview, could be a work sample, could be a written assessment, could be any sort of assessment that you want to give candidates before the competency-based interview to, in fact, assess their knowledge, their abilities, their skills, etc., etc. It is also performance known to take into consideration the personality and behavior and the motivation. Now, those two attributes, those two fields are the ones that you're going to be assessed on during a competency-based interview. So you're going to be assessed on your motivation and you're going to be assessed on your personality traits and behaviors, notably on the past behavior. Now, the example that we always give when we train people is the famous example of the driver. When you hire a driver, you want to make sure that the driver is familiar with the driving directions, the driving laws of the countries. You want to make sure that the driver drives carefully and that he knows all the parts of the vehicle in case he needs to replace it, etc., etc. So those two are part of the technical skills, are part of the competence of the driver, of his abilities to drive, his knowledge of the streets laws, and his knowledge also of the vehicle. But you also want to make sure that the driver is discreet when he drives or she drives, and that he or she does not listen to confidential information of staff members that are driven. You want to make sure that the driver is on time. You want to make sure that the driver also can keep a schedule. And so all these are part of the motivation, are part of the behavioral and personality traits of the driver, and are also very much important to perform the job. So it's really an ensemble of things that you need to consider when you hire a person. And the competency-based interview is not sufficient to hire a person. You also have to test the abilities and the competence of this person through a separate process, which is called either the written assessment or any other type of assessment. So the main tenets of the CBI is that the past performance is the best indicator of future performance. In other words, if you have done something in the past, chances are, in a certain way, chances are that you will do it again. And this is what you need to demonstrate in competency-based interview. You need to give concrete examples to demonstrate that you have done well things before, so that the panel will see that chances are that you will do the same thing in the same way in the future. Okay? Now, going to understanding the competencies here. We have picked planning and organizing because planning and organizing is a very easy to understand competency. Is made of 6 indicators. As you know, all competencies in the UN are described by separate indicators. Some competencies may have less, like technological awareness, and some competencies or core values like professionalism may have more, 7 indicators. Planning and organizing has 6 indicators. Now, our way of understanding the competency is really to focus on each and every indicator, because you have to make sure that when you respond to the question on planning and organizing, you really go through each and every indicator. You touch upon all of them so that the panel can rate you, can have evidence on each and every one of them for your answer. What is the best way to touch on all indicators? There is no best way. There is just a way that may help you depending on your on how you learn. Okay. What we recommend is that when you go through each and every indicator, you really underline, highlight the words that for you are meaningful. Now, we have done the work for you in this competence, and we have underlined the words goals, strategies in the first indicator. We have underlined the words priorities in the second one. We have underlined the words time and resources for the third indicator. We have underlined the word risks. I may also have underlined the word contingencies in the fourth indicator. And then in the fifth one, adjust plans. The sixth one, we have underlined the word efficiently. Now, when you underline these words, then you have to come up with an example that really touches on all these words. And this will help you in your mind to recall all the indicators. You cannot possibly retain all the indicators when you're doing a competency-based interview, and it would also seem that you are not genuine and spontaneous when you respond. So the best way to prepare at home, because you do have to prepare at home, is really to remember some of the words for each indicators and build your examples around those words. So let me show you one practice, okay, that we have done for you. So one effective CBI answer, one approach to building an effective CBI answer is to build your answer, like I said, according to the competency, so around the indicators of the competency. So as I said, you choose one word or two per indicator. You think about examples from your past experience. It could be either your current experience, but something that you have already done, or it could be your past experience in a previous role. Now, what the CARL is the context, action, results, lesson learned model that I'm sure most of you have seen previously, and it's also reported in CBI trainings. So the CAR model is what we recommend you to use when you structure your responses to the panel. In the action part, so in the second part, in the A part of the CAR model, you should build your answer, making sure that you refer to all the words that you had previously chosen for the indicators. And also, whenever possible, not always it would be indicated or possible to refer to lessons learned. Whenever it's possible and feasible, please finish your answer by telling how you have incorporated the learning that you have made on this past experience in future other actions that you have taken, so that the panel really sees that if there was a challenge and you have overcome it, then you have acted like that consistently also in the future, and you have really interiorized this learning. Now, when you use the CAR model to structure your answers, you have to give a little bit of context. So you have to really contextualize your answer. You have to say typically the year, your function, the office where you were working, and state briefly what challenge, what task you were assigned. In the actions, you have to really say how. Remember the slide on competence versus competency, the what versus the how. Here you have to tell the panel how you made a thing work that previously did not work, how you solved a problem, how you have planned a project, etc., etc. You really have to tell them your behaviors. And you have here in this part to refer to the words of the competencies, of the indicators. Do not repeat indicators. If you repeat indicators, the panel will see that you're not genuine. Repeat some of the words of the indicators for them to refer to them in the end in their notes and see that they have evidence to rate you on each and every one of them. In the result part of the CAR, you should state what difference you made through the actions and behaviors that you had explained previously. And in the learning, you have to show that there is a new behavior. So, as I said before, if there was a lesson learned, that you have interiorized it and that you have applied it in future similar other circumstances. Now, again, you have to state a situation, a challenge or a problem, state what you did, indicate the beneficial results and any lessons learned. We have prepared for you an example. Again, this is fictitious and it just serves for the purposes of this exercise for you to see how a response should be prepared. There's a brief context, very brief context. Do not get lost in the context because you only have 5 to 10 minutes to respond to a competency and there may be more than one question. So really be mindful of the time because it is your responsibility to time yourself during interviews. So brief context, brief but clear. So always state the year, always state your role. It is very important that you state your role, state where you were working, and state what was the task assigned to you or what was the situation or challenge. And in the actions, you see that we have repeated some of the words from the indicators without restating, plainly restating the indicators themselves. In the result, we have stated what was the positive impact on the team after our actions. And in the lesson learned, we stated what we would have done differently in hindsight and how we have incorporated this learning for future projects. Okay, this will be shared with you after the presentation, so no worries, you don't have to take notes. Now, just as a wrap up, here we have said that in effective answers, you should always use the past tense and past examples, but you should also always use contextualized and concrete examples. Never be vague, never said there was a time in which, or always contextualize your example, always give concrete pieces of information for the panel to understand that this is not something you have made up, but this is something really taken from your previous experience, and to give them really clear and good information that they can use in assessing your answer. And always explain how you did something. Always go back to your behaviors and not to just the what, to your technical skills, but how you applied those technical skills to a concrete situation. Typically, an ineffective answer, as I was telling you before, would be in the present tense, in a vague tense, in a hypothetical, also conditional tense, which doesn't give any sort of information to the panel as to how you really behaved in a past situation, and would just focus on what you did. Simply state small actions that you did without incorporating the behaviors that you have really had in order to carry out that task or that project. Now, I don't know if there is any question, but right now I would like to share with you. So I will stop sharing this presentation and I would like to share with you the workbook so that we can see together and have maybe 10 minutes of practice and then a Q&A session. Okay, so this is the workbook that was also shared with you by Alison. I hope you see it here. So you see in the first page, we just summarized what I just told you. And in the second page, on page 2, there is an exercise still on planning and organizing. So the same indicators that we have seen before. There is one behavioral question. And there are some probing questions that will help you to prepare your example. And here in the box, remember to always use the CARL model, the CAR model, to structure your answer. Okay, there are some annexes here, all the UN competencies, but you should really focus on this practice on page 2 by using what we have just said. Let me again share the presentation where we have this exercise. Okay. So go to page 2 in your worksheet, think about an example, and build your response by answering the probing questions. And then always remember to use the CAR model at the bottom of the page. And then always remember that the success for an interview is brought by how much preparation there is behind the interview. So you should really practice at home. Practice with a colleague, with a friend, with a family member, but you should practice before the interview. Going to the interview unprepared, with no answers prepared, no examples, and not having really practiced aloud what you have written, it is never a good idea. Okay? So it's 11:54. Let's say that until 12 or a couple of more minutes, we will do the practice. And then we can go to the Q&A session, and let me check if there are any questions in the chat. And in the meantime, I will answer the chat. So go ahead with the practice. You have until 12:03 to do the practice, and then we will just resume with the Q&A session. Good luck with the practice. Okay. So we can now move to the Q&A session. If there is any question that you, because I saw there was no question in the chat and I was really surprised. So
that is correct.
Usually we receive a lot of questions when we facilitate with Jesus. I wonder whether everything is clear, which I doubt, because it's still a topic that we explore very often with staff members, and we receive a lot of questions. So please ask your question, be honest, anything that wasn't clear in the presentation, any challenge that you have had in doing this exercise, or if anybody wants to also share his or her answer to see whether it is effective and whether it follows the CARL module.
We have a few comments in the chat, Valentina.
Okay,
just asking if the PDF copy of today's presentation can be
sure.
shared.
We will share it after the presentation, yes. Actually, we can, Alison, what do you think? We can post it in the chat?
Sure thing. What
We
I
have the
can
PDF already of the presentation. So maybe if we post it in the chat, since we don't have the names of all the participants, and it will be difficult afterwards to send it to all participants, we will post it in the chat. So if you have 2 seconds after the meeting, we will just post the PDF. The PDF is already saved, Alison, in the share drive, so you can just post it afterwards. So don't worry, you don't have to take notes because everything will be shared with you. So any questions that you have and about the practice, any challenges that you found, or what, let me just rephrase, what is the usual challenge that you find in competency-based interview and in responding to questions? Because I'm sure that there are many questions that may be difficult to answer. And what is the main challenge that you find in preparing for a competency-based interview? I hear somebody, but very, very far away. Not really. Can you go maybe closer to the speaker?
Yes, absolutely.
A little bit better. Who is speaking?
My name is Rashmi.
Okay. Hello. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks to Alison for presenting to us so clearly. I have a question, please. When you say that this Carl model will really help us achieve the interview, let's say I actually did not achieve what I was given as a task and I failed at it. Should I actually highlight that because of failure, and will that affect my interview outcome? Do you think? I'm just trying to be honest at the end. That's what I want.
Let me just, you were a bit cut. So let me just repeat what I understand. If you use the CAR model and you are unsuccessful, and then you stated something about being honest in the interview.
Yeah, for example, like I'm describing from my past experience, and there has been a situation where I could not meet the deadline and have learned from my failure. So will that actually affect the outcome of the interview just because I was honest?
Okay, thanks for the question. When you have failed something, and typically these are the questions that we receive in when we do these workshops on preparing for competency-based interviews, how to respond to difficult questions. And difficult questions are always questions that are turned in the negative, so that you have to basically, instead of showcasing the best of you in the interview, they're asking you to share negative examples, which is always the most difficult part for human beings, to share our things that we have done less well and things that were less successful. This is definitely something we do not want to do. This is why the CAR model helps you, because even if you had a failure and the failure was behind not in your control and was something that you managed at least to you manage somehow, you can always go to the last part of the CAR, which is something that I've said, whenever it's feasible and needed, please always end your example with the lesson learned. Because if you end your example with the lesson learned and you had a failure, you say, well, I have done things like that. I did things like that in that occasion. And I realized in hindsight, had I done this, things could have turned differently. And therefore, when I had another similar occasion, I did interiorize this learning and I did apply it to the concrete situation. So you're telling them, I'm a human being, I made a mistake, but I learned from this mistake. And in the next similar situation, I've applied my lesson learned to the future, to the other situation. And this is what you want them to hear. you want to finish in a positive note. You never want to finish in a negative note. You never want to say, oh, yeah, I didn't achieve the milestone, I didn't roll out the project, and everything was a failure. No, you should be honest, but you should also tell them that you have learned from your mistake. Nobody is asking you to make up things. You don't have to make up things. You just have to turn them. If you follow the CAR model, it's really easy for you to turn them into an example where you have learned, where you have, you know, taken from the past mistakes and apply the lesson learned in future situations. So it is never a good idea to make up things. And so it is good to be honest, to answer your question, but it is also good to finish, end up in a positive note so that the panel sees that whatever mistakes you have done in the past, you have then corrected them. And again, it's human nature. Nobody does not make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes in work. So the panel is not looking for somebody perfect. And as a matter of fact, when I'm member of a panel or I'm ex officio, and everybody in, you know, all the interviewees are saying that they're the best, that they have done things perfectly, that everything went smoothly, this is when I have a doubt as to the genuinity of the person that is speaking. Because in real life, things go wrong. And what you're asked to do is actually to manage the disaster, so to speak, so to make it as little as possible. And therefore, I think that it's always good to say that you made a mistake, but that you have corrected it in future occasions. Did I answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Let me check. I see there's something in
There's
the
some
chat.
in the chat. Coming up with different examples for each competency is a challenge.
It's a challenge. And this is Greta. Greta, you want to elaborate more, or can I just answer?
No, sorry. My question was another one, actually.
Yes.
Using the, maybe you are referring to the comment that was given by Veronica. My question was using the indicator and translating them into probing questions to prepare effective answers.
I see. Sorry, I misread your. Veronica was coming up with different. So we will address the question later, Veronica. So your challenge, Greta, is using the indicators and translating them into probing questions. Did it help the strategy that we gave you to just have 1 or 2 words for each indicator and then come up with an example that was touching on all of them? Well, does this help?
I have to see. I have to practice.
Because this will allow you to at least build one example. Then obviously, as Veronica says, you need to build more than one example. If you have 5 advertised competencies, my advice is to build at the very least 2 examples per competency. What I do personally is to build 4 per competency, to just have all scenarios covered. Then it is true that you can adjust. If you have at least 2 answers, you can adjust them to pretty much all the questions, but it will be harder for you to adjust them to all questions, especially if, as our colleague said before, you have a negative question. And so they're asking you to share negative information, which is always difficult to do for us. So another way that you can translate the indicators into probing questions, you see, the probing questions are asked only if you don't touch upon the indicators. If you give a rounded up answer, as we showed you in the example, that touches on all the indicators, it is unlikely, I'm not saying that it is impossible, but it is less likely that the panel will ask for probing questions. The panel asks for probing questions in 2 scenarios: when you didn't cover an indicator, and so they don't have enough information for that indicator, and they need to assess you on all indicators. So they need to have information if they're doing a good job about that specific indicator, or when you have given information that they want to validate. And so going back to the examples I was giving before, when people say, oh, everything went smoothly and I did the best and I was the best and blah, 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 blah. Typically, that's where the panel should follow up and say, tell me exactly, what did you do? And wasn't there any challenge in this? I mean, there's always a challenge. We work for the United Nations. We know there's always something that goes wrong, always something. You should have a plan B, C, D, E, and et cetera, because there's always something that can possibly go wrong. So when you state your example, try to be as true as possible, but try also to be as realistic as possible. So to build up probing questions, it's only in the case that you have not touched on those indicators. So I think that if you build a complete answer, it'll be really, really less likely for the panel to ask you for probing questions. Okay, in the practice, we have put probing questions for you to be able to really indicate each indicator, because otherwise you may touch upon some of them. Typically in planning and organizing, one indicator that is almost never touched upon is the contingency planning, so the risks, okay? Which is why maybe to highlight the word risk and to remember the word risk will allow you to at least put a sentence on what did you do to foresee risk and to come up with contingency planning. This is one indicator that typically is almost never asked, and there is typically always a follow-up question on that indicator. So try really ensure that your answer is as complete as possible. And in my experience, if the answer is complete, there will be less likelihood of probing questions. Was this clear, Greta? Okay. And then Veronica, do you also want to maybe elaborate a little bit more on your question on finding difficulty in building more than one example? What exactly do you find challenging because you don't have enough examples? Veronica, do you want to share or do you want me to simply answer?
Yes, thank you. For me, this came about when I was doing my first interview, coming to the UN. I had done several interviews, but I was not getting through. So when it came to the competencies, the panel had to ask me to state examples or scenarios, not to repeat them, but base them on different organizations that I had worked. Now my question is, assuming you've worked in only one organization and in only one position, how do you come up with all these examples? Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, if you only had one position, you have less likelihood to provide examples. And this is why in the competency-based framework, we usually start with an overarching question, which is, tell me what opportunities you had to plan and organize. And then that's where the candidate will give his or her breadth of experience, saying, oh, I've had, in my current role, this opportunity, then in the previous role, I had this other opportunity, and then in the other role, 10 years ago, I had this opportunity. And then the panel will tell you, okay, pick one, and then let's speak about an example where you had a challenge in developing a project, something like that. So typically, if the competency-based interview approach were followed really to the bone, you would have this overarching question for the panel to be able to assess the breadth of your experience. If you only had one experience, of course, it would be more difficult for you to come up with examples, but it's always possible to come up with examples by looking at your personal history profile, that now is called candidate profile, so the CP now, and looking at all the achievements that you had in these positions. When you look at all the achievements, these are your answers. You take an achievement and you just adjust it to the competency that you want to use. Okay, so you should have typically 3 to 5 achievements for each of the position. You had only one position, you take the achievement, and really you can adjust the achievement to one competency, and you have one example. Then think about a negative question and think about something challenging that you had, always incorporating the lesson learned. And then you have already 2 examples per question. So this is what you need to do. You really have to go to your candidate profile to look at the achievements that you had in your candidate profile for this position. If you have not written achievements, start writing your achievements, because that's how you prepare for a competency-based interview. You want to showcase the positive things, and you need to prepare for also sharing negative information. So prepare one positive and one negative per competency. And then you know that at least you're covered for most of the questions that they may ask you for that competency. Okay? Was this, I think this is the best approach that you should take in preparing if you only had one position.
Okay, thank you.
Most welcome. Then I see there's one from, sorry, Greta. I answered some advice about the last question when the panel asked questions in the if the candidate have questions. UNDRR Geneva, you are referring to the last question when typically is do you have any questions for us, right? And you want an advice on what to ask. Did I understand correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, there is no right or wrong here. So you can very well end the interview saying, I don't have any questions. Our advice when we train people is always to ask one question. The question can be either practical, and if it is practical, is really answered very quickly by HR or by the ex officio. So what are the next steps? Am I going to be informed? These are questions that are really easy to ask and that you should know. What are the next steps in the UN? You know that when you pass the competency-based interview, then there will be a report being written, a compliance review, and then finally there will be a selection. So typically that takes, depending on the office, it takes between 3 to X amount of weeks. So you really don't want to ask this question because it is something that you already know. You want to ask a question that is pertinent to the job. So typically we suggest people to ask questions related to the team, related to the functions of the post, or related to any other things that may be relevant. Be mindful of the time. Realistically, I'm telling you, if a panel has a very strict time, if you see that you have 5 competencies and they told you, oh, it's going to be a 45 minutes interview, that doesn't give you a lot of time to ask questions at the end. So your questions should be really clear and straight to the point. Okay, that's my only advice. So again, to ask something about the substance of the post, to show your interest and motivation, but also to be mindful of the time. You can't really ask the hiring manager to outline all the members of the team and what each of the member does, because realistically there is no time in the time frame of the interview. And then I see what if I'm asked from Maike, what if I'm asked to provide a recent example? Do I need to come up with one on the spot, or can I decide to give a better example from the longer past and inform the panel about this? I don't really know how to answer this, Maike, because it depends on the question. If the question is really, okay, one thing that I would like to highlight is that in this session, we looked at how to better answer CBI questions. One thing that we have not said is that to better answer CBI questions, you really have to answer the question. So you really have to listen to what is asked to you and target your response to that specific question. So in this case, if they ask you to come up with a recent example, you should come up with a recent example, unless you don't have any. And then you will ask the panel for a couple of minutes or at least 30 seconds to think about an example. If you cannot come up with one example from the recent past, you will say, I have an example from, I don't know, 3 years ago, and I will use this example, and I hope this will answer your question. And let them tell you whether this is okay for them or not. If they still insist on a recent example, still ask for time to think, and you have the right, to think. If we were on a face-to-face interview, I would even say ask for water, ask for anything that gives you time to just pause and think, and you will find an example. And it is your right to have time to think, because competency-based interviews are always thought to be, I ask you a question and you respond right away. No, you ask me a question, I have to have the time to reflect and to think about an example, even though I have prepared examples before, but I still have to think about the pertinent example and the example that I will target to this specific question. Again, be very concrete and very to the point with the question that is asked to you. So my advice is to first answer the question as much as possible. And then if you really, really, really see that you don't have a recent example, then you ask them, is it okay if I share an example from X amount of years ago? And I think this is a pertinent example and will answer your question. And let them choose whether it's fine or not. Okay, we have another one from Isabel. Can you clarify whether it is better that the examples are recent or cannot? I think I've answered the question, Isabel. I don't really have an answer to that, because having recent examples may be good or may be bad at the same time. I've had cases of candidates using just examples from their current positions, so very recent examples, and then the panel at the end saying, oh, this person has such a wide experience, but this person has only used examples from his or her current assignment. And that's a pity, because he or she could have used examples from, this assignment, this other assignment, to just show the breadth. Remember the breadth of the experience that should be asked at the beginning. You as a candidate, you should showcase this breadth, because the panel may have read your candidate profile or may not have read your candidate profile, or may have just flicked through it. So they may not be that really familiar with your experience. So your job here is to tell them, I have a lot of experience, whenever you have a lot of experience, and build examples on all this experience, so that at the end, they have a summary that they say, wow, this person has worked here, has worked there, one example on this, one example on that. Really, there's a breadth of experience, as opposed to just one example and always examples on the same assignment. My advice would be to really be as varied as possible in your examples, not to use always the same role, and give recent examples whenever you think that these recent examples are pertinent. Be aware also that if you give very recent examples, there is no time to look back at what you've learned, because you may have given an example of your current job and you say, well, I'm currently working on this. So there is no time for you to reflect and look back at what you have learned, because your project is not over. So your examples should always be concluded in time, because you should have a lesson learned at the end, whereby you say, this happened, this is what I learned, this is what I applied in the future. So recent is good, but not too recent. And varied is even better. Varied examples from different assignments. Then any advice from Hugo on how to handle questions regarding our reactions to internal conflicts, or how one responds to when our work gets critiqued? It can be difficult. Yeah, this is Ugo. This is going back to sharing negative information. This is never this is never easy for people to share negative information. Remember that if there is a conflict in the team, and we all of us here had conflict in the team, it is impossible that in the UN or outside of the UN, we didn't experience a conflict in the team, whether directly or indirectly. So be honest about the conflict, be very clear and concrete about the role that you have played in resolving the conflict, and then remember the lesson learned at the end. So the key is really to be realistic, honest, pragmatic about it, but also to end on a positive note. And when your work gets critiqued, well, what did you do when you receive critiques to your work? Were these critiques were they founded? Were they backed up by facts? If they were, then you should have, you know, acknowledged them and moved forward by incorporating them into the future work. And this is what you should say to the panel, very simply. I don't see any other question. Alison, did I miss any? Because I think we should wrap up right now because it's 12:29. Did I miss any question?
No other questions. That was the last one.
Okay. Well, I think we have addressed most of them at least. And we will share the presentation, or I think, Alison, you've already shared it. And I would like to thank you for being here. As you know, Jesus is not here, and we all miss him very much. He's on vacation. He's he's in greener pastures, and he will come back next week. So he will be with us for the next session. Please always remember to follow our sessions. They are once every month during the last Thursday of the month. And here in the PowerPoint, we have highlighted the next sessions. The next one will be on 28th of October about dealing with difficult questions. Again, what we have just touched on. Then we will have on 25th of November, networking. And again, on 27th of January, the continuation of networking. So we look forward to seeing you in the next sessions. And we really thank you for your time and questions today. Thank you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.